If this CCTV image looks creepy to you, just wait until you hear what he's about to do. It was a cold November night in 2019 in Illinois. The university students in the area had been super excited to go to this frat party that had been arranged. One of these was 19-year-old Ruth George. Now, as you can see by her picture, she was stunning, but she was also incredibly intelligent, a really well-liked, genuine girl, and she was a great student as well. She was really dedicated to learning. So on the night of the 22nd, she went to this party and she had a great time. Nothing was off actually at the party itself, but nobody was expecting what happened next. So Ruth waved goodbye to her friends at the end of the evening. They weren't far away from their individual cars. Now Ruth was parked in the multi-story like garage nearby. It shouldn't have taken her long to get home. So why didn't she make it back? Her mum was frantic when Ruth never showed up home. She rang police and she was like, this is so out of character. So police set about tracking down Ruth's phone. They figured that the phone wouldn't be far away from where Ruth was. And sure enough, the trail led them to that very car park. And there was Ruth's car. But they were going to find a lot more than they bargained for inside the vehicle. As they approached the car, they could see something in the back seat. Something human. Horrifically, Ruth's body lay there lifeless. And what Ruth had gone through in her final minutes was absolutely horrifying, even for police officers that were very, very used to investigating crimes. There were signs she'd been brutally SA'd and strangled. Now the race was on to track down not only who did this, but where were they now? So the first thing police did was track down CCTV from that parking garage, and the images were just chilling. It very clearly showed Ruth walking to her car, but she wasn't alone. She was being followed. I feel like it's every girl's worst nightmare, being followed by a random man. It just sends chills down my spine. A man had catcalled her, and when she hadn't responded, he got faster and faster and faster until he eventually caught up with her. 35 minutes later, he could be seen running from the scene. They were able to see very clearly that this guy was 26-year-old Donald Thurman, and he was no stranger to police. He'd actually only served 2 of 6 years behind bars for armed robbery. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like I see this all the time. People who are committing crimes are people that haven't served their full sentence behind bars. How about people just stay in prison for the length of their sentence? Is that too much to ask? He'd been on parole for less than a year. And the autopsy was just horrific. It confirmed that she'd essentially been put in a chokehold from behind until she passed out, and then she'd been SA'd. They found Donald's palm print and DNA at the crime scene, and he was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated SA. Now, actually, the last thing that I could find about this crime was that he was being held without bail. But I can't find anywhere whether he was found guilty, whether he pleaded guilty, whether he was sentenced to any time behind bars for this crime. Last updates I could find were literally 2019, and I need to know that this guy is not out free, so please do leave a comment.
His parents took away his Halo 3 game, so he came up with a plan to end their lives. The Petrick family was known to be tight-knit. Mark was a pastor, and his wife Susan upheld their Christian values. Their 16-year-old son Daniel was different, and although he never showed any signs of dangerous behavior, something started to change in him after a skiing accident. He had severe spinal damage, which made him housebound for a year, but before that he was known to be a fun, loving boy, energetic, and a joy to be around. But after being confined to his home for more than a year, his demeanor started to change. Daniel started to play video games. It was introduced to the Halo series by his friend Jonathan. If you're not familiar with the game Halo, the goal is to kill and shoot as many aliens and parasites as possible, and Daniel would go over to his friend Jonathan's house and play from 7 to 8 hours a day. Since the Petrick family were Christian, Susan and Mark did not let Daniel play any kind of violent video games, but by this point, he was addicted to the thrill. Once Mark found out that Daniel was playing this violent video game, he gave him an ultimatum that he either had to stop playing this game or move out and move in with his friend Jonathan. Daniel chose to stay with Jonathan for the weekend, and he spent up to 18 hours playing Halo with minimal breaks. At this point, Jonathan's parents began to grow concerned about the video game, so they told Daniel to move back home. October of 2007, Daniel asked his father to buy him the new Halo 3 game. Obviously, Mark refused, but Daniel still snuck out of the house and waited hours in line for the new game. Daniel purchased a copy thinking that he wasn't going to be caught and snuck it back into his home. Mark caught Daniel playing the game, which resulted in an argument, so he confiscated the game and placed it in a safe next to the family's handgun. Mark thought by confiscating the game it would solve the issues altogether, but in the following days, things would take an unexpected turn. On the evening of October 20th, Daniel's parents were sitting on the couch in the living room when Daniel walked up behind them and told them to close their eyes because he had a surprise for them. As they closed their eyes, they heard a click of a gun, but by then it would be too late. Daniel fired at the back of his father's head and did the same to his mom. But he didn't stop there. He made sure to fire 2 more rounds. As soon as the shooting had ended, Daniel's sister Heidi showed up to the home with her husband. Daniel was blocking the doorway and told her not to come in because their parents had an argument, but she could hear moaning coming from the living room, so she pushed past him and she could see a bloodbath. Heidi called 911 while Daniel fled the scene in the family van and made sure to take his copy of Halo 3. But he wouldn't get too far before officers located the van, blocked him in, and arrested him. When Daniel was taken into custody, he immediately blamed his father, claiming that his father is the one who shot his mother and then shot himself. Daniel had even placed the gun in Mark's hand to make it seem like he was the one who did all of this. Although Susan didn't survive her injuries, what Daniel didn't know was that Mark was alive and slowly recovering. He pled not guilty due to insanity, and his defense team claimed that the influence of Halo caused him to commit this act. During trial, Mark addressed the courtroom and stated that he forgave his son and believed that he deserved a second chance. Ultimately, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years.
Her killer was already in the house in her bed, hiding under the covers. Hollywood therapist Dr. Amy Harwick literally had it all. She was super intelligent, successful. She'd become kind of like a bit of a mini celebrity in her field. She was also obviously stunningly beautiful, as you can see. She had a loving family, she had great friends, and she had a fun life. She was once even engaged to the host of The Price is Right, not Bruce Forsyth. So on this particular evening, she was letting her hair down with her girlfriends. They went to this like a burlesque show. It was just the most fun girls' night. Then when it was over, she headed back to her Hollywood Hills home. But something was bubbling under the surface. Amy had had a really difficult time with an ex-boyfriend. This was Gareth Pursehouse. Now, the pair had dated, and Amy just wasn't happy anymore and she didn't want to see him anymore, but he was one of those guys that just wouldn't take no for an answer. It literally got so bad that she had no other alternative. She was like, my only option is to get a restraining order. But do you think he was going to let a piece of paper get in his way? She got home at 1 a.m. and she just expected to get straight into her bed. She had no idea that that's where her killer waited, hiding under her own duvet, waiting to strike. Just after Amy made her way inside and up the stairs, her neighbour could hear screams. And he was like, oh my god, those are blood-curdling screams. That means somebody is in serious danger and I need to ring police straight away. So that's what he did. And the horror wasn't over. When emergency services arrived at the scene, they expected to have to go into the house to find Amy. But they didn't. They found her lying on the ground under the 3rd floor balcony. She had defensive wounds all over her hands. She had literally fought for her life. Inside the apartment was absolute chaos. There was a broken necklace on the ground, beads everywhere. The contents of her bag was scattered all over the floor. There was even a random syringe with like a mysterious liquid inside. Amy had been launched 20 feet from her balcony. She was raced to hospital, but tragically there was nothing that they could do to save her. And it was very clear from not only speaking to her family and friends, but also examining Ring doorbell footage of who the killer was. Her ex, Gareth, was spotted on the neighbour's security camera, basically trying to cover over the sensor because he thought that that would turn the camera off. The details of the prior police reports were absolutely shocking. Amy had previously reported Gareth for choking her, suffocating her, kicking and punching her, and even slamming her head into the ground. After this, she'd even experienced a mysterious break-in where somebody, don't know who, had gone through her stuff and smashed photos in her house. And honestly, the police were like, well, we can't prove it was him. Forensics examined the apartment after the murder and found Gareth's blood was on the glass doors that he'd broken to get inside. And they found inside that mysterious syringe was poison. This was very clearly an intentional plan, but he'd decided to just throw her off the balcony instead. She was found guilty of her murder and was given life in prison without parole, but many people say that she actually probably would be still alive if there was more done to stop men like this.
This 12-year-old was sawed in half because he didn't pay his friend back in a video game. 16-year-old Daniel Petrie had a history of violent outbursts which frightened his parents so badly that they sent him to different psychiatrists in Brazil, hoping that there was something to help their son. But Daniel hated doctors and he refused to talk. He acted out during the sessions and eventually stopped going. Eventually, he stopped going to school, and people started to speculate that he was in a psychiatric hospital, but he was just at home spending all of his time online playing this game called Tibia. Daniel would spend hours at a time playing this game, interacting with other players. This is when Daniel would meet 12-year-old Gabriel Kuhn online. Daniel ended up living very close to Gabriel, and the two became very good friends, or at least that's what it seemed like. Gabriel set up a private server for himself and Daniel to play, and one day Gabriel had asked Daniel if he could borrow some coins from him so he could buy something from the game store. He needed 20,000 coins, which would be equivalent to $1.75. Gabriel told Daniel that he would repay him in a couple of days, so Daniel agreed to the loan. On the day that Gabriel promised to repay the coins, Daniel logged into the game and noticed that he was blocked from the server. Daniel was enraged but decided he was going to visit Gabriel at his home. Gabriel was home alone when Daniel arrived, and even though he owed him money, he didn't realize the type of rage that was filled inside of Daniel. Gabriel opened the door, welcomed him inside, hoping that he could make things right with his friend. As soon as Daniel walked inside, he immediately attacked Gabriel by beating him and essaying him. Gabriel was on the floor bleeding in pain, and Daniel was just laughing at him. Gabriel then said he was going to tell his mom what had happened, so that's when Daniel grabs a cord from Gabriel's computer and strangles him with it. He tightened the cord around Gabriel's neck until he stopped moving. At this point, Daniel assumed that Gabriel was dead, so he tried to hide his body into a crawl space, but the entrance was not wide enough. Daniel figured the best way to hide Gabriel's body would be to dismember it, so he located a saw and began sawing at his torso. Gabriel was still alive, and he awoke screaming in pain. But this excited Daniel, and he continued sawing at his body until it was in 2 pieces. He carved tibia symbols into Gabriel's body and tried to stuff his body into that same crawl space, but it still didn't fit. Daniel ended up leaving Gabriel's body in the hallway and fled the home, and Gabriel's brother is the one who discovered his body. Police questioned Daniel as soon as they learned about their online argument, and Daniel admitted to everything and told them all of the details. Brazilian authorities charged Daniel as a juvenile, and he was sentenced to 3 years at a juvenile facility. In 2010, Daniel was released from that facility.
31 years ago today, Stephanie Wazilishin was murdered at the hands of her boyfriend, Russell Peterson. Her death was ruled a homicide classified as violent, and Russell was listed as the only suspect. But here we are, 31 years later, and he's never been arrested. I had the honor of talking with Stephanie's daughter, Nikki, who's here on TikTok, and it's important that you all listen to what she has to say.
What I want the world to know about my mom is that she was a very unhappy, neglected woman that got trapped in a domestic violence situation because she got pregnant, had the man's child, and kind of got stuck. You can relate to that. Any woman that's been in a shitty relationship and has a child can relate to the fact that you get stuck. Women are 70 times more likely to be killed within the first 2 weeks of leaving a relationship than any other time while in the relationship. I want the world to know that my mom talked to my dad at 8:07 on July 8th, 1993, and she made plans to leave Russell Bennett Peterson, and 5 hours later, she was pronounced dead. My dad has had the same story for 30 years. She was coming back to him, and my dad's life was just shattered. Our lives were shattered, and we're still picking up the pieces 30 years later. That's why I want the world to know that she was robbed of a whole new life that she could have had with my dad, who was really the love of her life originally. She was going back to him. That's what I want the world to know.
On July 9th, 1993, Russell claims that he got off work a little after 11 p.m. and went home to the house that he shared with Stephanie that sits on Coffee Pot Drive in Sedona, Arizona. Russell was a chef, and they also shared the home with Stephanie's daughters, Nikki, who was 10 at the time, and her little sister, who was 3. Russell claims that after getting home, he got in the shower and shared a bottle of wine with Stephanie. But their conversation would get heated after Stephanie mentioned that she had been on the phone with Nikki's dad for a while before he got home. The conversation then shifted to how Russell was about to leave to New York for 2 weeks after being accepted into Cornell for a culinary program. Russell states that an argument broke out, which made Stephanie go into their bedroom, pull out a gun, which was a Ruger Red Hawk .44 Magnum revolver, and return back into the living room. Russell says Stephanie cocked the gun and said, "I'm going to shoot you," and then fired the gun, which missed him, putting a bullet into the living room wall. He then states that Stephanie went into their bedroom with the gun, with him following her close behind. And then a struggle ensued, which resulted in the gun going off, shooting Stephanie in the neck, killing her. I want to be clear that this is all based on what Russell has said, because the only other person that truly knows what happened is no longer alive to tell the story.
My first impression of that night of waking back up was flashlights in my face. That's the first thing I remember, is lights in my face and telling me to get up, get dressed. your mom and Russell got into a fight. They never told me that my mom was dead, even though they knew it. They told me that my mom had gotten into a fight. They told me to get dressed, and then they escorted me from my home, trying to block me from what I was seeing in the living room. But right where I said goodnight to my mom on the couch, like I had come up behind her, I gave her a hug and went to bed. Now it sits Russell Bennett Peterson there, and he's got his hands up and he's got blood on them. I remember seeing blood, and he's rocking and he's talking really fast. And that's the last thing I remember, because it was 10 seconds it took to escort me through and to get me to the cop car. That was the last time I was in my home.
It would take Russell about 30 minutes before calling the police, which he eventually did at 1:40 that morning, and the 911 call is infuriating.
911, what's your emergency?
I need help.
What kind of help, sir?
There has been a very bad accident. Me and my wife, we were in an argument, and she's hurt. She's hurt very bad. I need help.
Okay, what's wrong with her?
She's been shot.
She was shot?
Yes.
Who shot her?
We were... I don't know who.
You don't know who shot her?
She might have shot herself.
Were you close together, far apart? No, we were not far apart. We were close together. I can't give you exacts on that. It all happened so fast, I don't know. I mean, we were there was a struggle. Next thing I know, there was a pop and she dropped.
He changed his story multiple times and wouldn't tell authorities if Stephanie pulled the trigger or if he did. But when he told the story, it was never once the same. When Sedona PD arrived 3 minutes later, Stephanie was already dead. But there are so many pieces in this case that were completely mishandled and looked over by authorities. For starters, according to the autopsy, gunpowder residue was found on Stephanie's left palm, and she was right-hand dominant. According to the pathologist, after examining the neck wound, they found that it was considered a contact wound, and the presence of gunpowder residue on her left hand is consistent with her hands being up in a defensive posture. The location of the wound and gunpowder residue indicated that this was not self-inflicted or even accidental. What it does indicate is that Stephanie was murdered at the hands of Russell Peterson. Russell was listed as a suspect after police found out that he tampered with the crime scene. After Stephanie was shot, he decided to pick up the gun, put it in the holster, and put it back in their closet. But then he decided to put it back on the ground. When asked about this, he said that he did it because he didn't want to be accused of murder. It kind of makes you question what innocent person would say that. Russell also let their 3-year-old daughter run around her mom's body, and you can even hear her in the background of the 911 call. She was literally trying to put her mom's blood back inside of her. When police arrived that night, they found Russell and their 3-year-old sitting on the bed in front of Stephanie's body. She kept saying, "That's my mommy." When they interviewed her, what she had to say was shocking.
They'll put me in the police squad car out front where I'll find my little sister, and she'll have a little stuffed toy, and she'll keep saying, "Poppy killed mommy. Poppy killed mommy. Poppy killed mommy." And she's saying it really excited, and I don't understand why she's saying it, because the police have just told me that Mom and Russell got into a fight. She went to Aunt Kay's house, which was a friend of hers at the time. Totally believe it. I'm 10. I'm naive. But my little sister's telling me Poppy killed mommy. And while we're in the car, I'm trying to convince her that's not what happened. The authorities just told me this. Like, I'm trying to reason with my 3-year-old sister that she's not dead, even though she knows that she is.
Russell tried to play off what she said by saying that she dreamt it all, and what she witnessed couldn't possibly be reliable because she was so young. Nikki, on the other hand, was woken up that night by flashlights in her face from police, who then put her sister, and Russell all in the back of a cop car together, which is extremely unethical considering he just killed their mom minutes prior. Sedona PD never even tested Russell's hands for gunpowder residue either, which is insane. Russell was only interviewed a handful of times because he literally canceled his appointments with the police. He was not cooperative with authorities, and he even went on to change his phone number in the middle of the investigation. Another major mistake made by Sedona PD was the fact that they never personally obtained Russell's phone records from that night. They waited until he brought them in months later, and what they would find is pretty black and white to me. Phone records show that right after Stephanie was murdered, Russell called his dad first, and that phone call lasted for a minute. What they talked about is unknown. It would then take Russell another 4 minutes to call the police. This unfortunately would never be investigated by Sedona PD until Nikki brought it up to them in 2023, 30 years later. But at this point, Russell's dad was already deceased. Now, the biggest question to me is, why did he call his dad first, and what did they talk about? You would think that with all of this evidence, the manner of death being labeled a homicide, with Stephanie's hands being put up to protect herself, and with Russell being labeled a suspect, that he would be charged with her murder. But no. On 2 separate occasions, this case was presented to the Yavapai County Attorney's Office, but prosecutors refused to file any charges, and they say that this is because of insufficient evidence. What's insane is that investigators even simulated the shooting with a model of the gun used. They had a woman with a similar frame and size as Stephanie attempt the same angle as the bullet's entry, and they concluded that this would have been incredibly difficult and unlikely for her to be able to shoot herself. She had never even shot a gun before. The two were together for 6 years, and their relationship was described as very tumultuous. Stephanie told her family more than 50 times that he was physically abusive to her, and that night she had plans to leave him and reconnect with Nikki's dad, who was her true love. It's not a coincidence that she ended up dead that night. Stephanie had a bruise on her arm, and the necklace that she was wearing that night had been ripped from her neck, further proving that this was a domestic violence incident that turned fatal. Just a year after Stephanie's murder, Russell remarried to a woman named Diane, and they quickly divorced after just a year of marriage. Diane would go on to say that Russell admitted to her that he did in fact kill Stephanie and confessed to the entire thing. He also confessed to washing his clothes and showering before calling the police that night. Unfortunately, Sedona PD didn't interview Nikki until last year, and when Nikki told them about Russell's confession, they said it was hearsay and nothing ever came of it. At this point, it's not known if they ever even interviewed Diane. Nikki became involved in her mom's murder 28 years later to try and get answers for herself, and she now has an entire TikTok page dedicated to this. Sadly, Sedona PD wrote her a letter last year basically stating that without Russell outright confessing, there isn't much they can do. But Russell refuses to interview with them or anyone for that matter, and Sedona PD says that they can't make him speak, even though he is the only suspect. This unfortunately has left her case frozen in time. One thing is for sure though, and that is that Stephanie never would have shot herself, and here's why.
And I want to point out something that if his story is correct, that means that my mother took the gun, pointing at him in the living room, to shoot a gun towards my bed, like a gunshot towards my room. My mother would never do that. Are you kidding? That's risking my life. It's just asinine. He did that to cover up. Oh my God, there's 2 things. Sign the petition. We've got a petition going. It's got like 7,000 signatures on to present a complete case file investigation to a grand jury, a jury of our peers, figure out if there's enough evidence to prosecute. That's all I'm asking. Present what we got to a grand jury. So that's what the petition is for. First of all, Russell, you were going to know it was always going to be me that was going to come for you. It was never going to be Wendy. You mind fucked your own kid. It was never going to be your own kid. It was always going to be me. And you always knew that. That's why you kind of always stalked me throughout your life to see what I was doing. That being said, I am never going to stop coming for you. It has been 28 years. I thought the police were going to do something. I held firm that the police were going to come and get you because of what you did. They are not. I will spend the rest of my life speaking publicly on the fact that you murdered my mother, and every piece of evidence I have gathered in the last 2 years will be publicly presented in a documentary and probably many more. By this time next year, I plan on speaking publicly to Nancy Grace. So I've told all my friends, this time next year, I'll be talking to Nancy Grace. And you better believe that I'm going to sick Nancy Grace on you too. Just confess. Well, at this point, you're just confess. You'll spend a couple years in prison for manslaughter and you'll probably be released. The longer that you drag this out, you're going to end up dying in prison. Just confess to your crimes and I'll go away and I'll stop publicly talking about you. You'll go away and you'll just not exist in my life, but I need you to pay for what you did. You ruined my life. You know that. Just confess.
Do you still love her?
Yes, I do.
No teamwork.
Don't forget, we got that on tape.
This mom went missing and was found on the side of the highway, beaten, branded, and chained up. Her name's Sherry. She's married with 2 kids, living with her husband Keith. Everything was going fine until one day her husband comes home and the house is completely empty. No wife and no kids, which was weird, and he's thinking, okay, maybe she went to go pick them up from daycare and go run some errands with them. He called her like a million times, no answer, so he called the daycare and asked, hey, what time did Sherry pick up the kids? But they told him that she never showed up at all. And that was so not like her. Sherry was not the type of mom to just forget about her kids. She always picked them up, and by the time Keith got home, they were waiting at the door for him. So when she didn't show up that day, he knew something was seriously wrong. He tracks her phone and finds it in an abandoned trail, headphones still plugged in, her blonde hair was tangled around the wires, but no Sherry. Now Keith is freaking out. He calls 911 and reports her missing ASAP, and a massive manhunt begins. The FBI gets involved, helicopters, search dogs, even a $100,000 reward. But after days of searching with zero signs of her, everyone was honestly thinking the absolute worst. But then 22 days later, Sherry mysteriously appears on a highway 150 miles away from home. She had lost so much weight that she was down 87 pounds, like skin and bones. Her nose was completely broken, her hair chopped off like someone violently hacked it off, and her wrists, her ankles, her waist covered in deep raw cuts from where they had chained her down. She even had a Bible verse burned into her shoulder, not tattooed, branded like an animal. She tells police that she was kidnapped at gunpoint by two Hispanic women who tortured her for weeks in some filthy dark room, and that one day the two women holding her hostage started arguing and randomly decided to let her go. Everyone, her kids, her husband, her family, they were just so happy to see her alive. But then people started questioning her story. It was just too bizarre to believe that two women randomly kidnapped another woman, which almost never happens statistically, and then tortured her for weeks and then just let her go. But the biggest hole in her story was that they found DNA on her clothes that didn't match two women but her ex-boyfriend, James. Turns out she made the whole thing up. She asked her ex to rescue her from her supposedly abusive marriage, stayed at his apartment for 3 weeks, living her best life, faked all her injuries, starved herself on purpose, and got him to literally brand her with a hot tool. All so she could pretend that she was kidnapped like some twisted gone girl. Why would anyone do this? Meanwhile, her poor husband was sobbing on national TV, begging for his wife's safe return. Her kids were so traumatized, thinking that a monster took mommy, and then the FBI wasted $300,000 trying to save her from absolutely nothing. And when they finally confronted her with all the evidence, she kept lying through her teeth until she literally couldn't anymore. Sherry was finally arrested in 2022 and sentenced to a measly 18 months in prison. Keith obviously filed for divorce and received full custody of her children, but get this, Sherry was released from prison in 2023 and now has the audacity to fight for custody of her kids. She had the nerve to say, and I quote, "My children have always been my primary focus," and that she doesn't want them watching the Hulu docuseries The Perfect Wife. But honestly, how delusional do you actually have to be to fake your own kidnapping, knowing that there are real women out there who don't make it home?
How this 11-year-old boy's disappearance was solved 27 years after he disappeared. Jacob Weatherling was like any other 11-year-old boy before his disappearance. His favorite color was blue. He loved sports, especially football, all things football. He loved watching football, playing football, collecting football cards. The day that Jacob disappeared, October 22nd, 1989, also was like any other normal day, but that night his parents had a dinner party at a friend's house about 20 minutes away, so Jacob was allowed to invite over his best friend Aaron to hang out with him, keep him company. Jacob also had a younger brother who was about 1 year younger than him and Aaron. His name was Trevor, so it was like the three boys all hanging out together. Around 9 p.m., the boys called their parents to see if they could ride their bikes to the video rental store. I'm sure you guys remember the days before Netflix where we had to beg our parents to take us to Blockbuster so we could like rent movies. Well, their mom said absolutely not. You're not riding your bikes alone at night. So the boys then asked to speak to their father. You remember like the old, if the one parent says no, ask the other one. Well, their father overruled the mother's decision, said yes, they could ride their bikes to the rental store as long as they were safe and brought a flashlight. It wasn't even a whole 45 minutes later, the parents got another phone call, but this time it was from their neighbor, frantically telling them they had to get home as soon as possible because something happened and Jacob was missing. Well, they immediately left to drive home, but it was about a 20-minute drive back to their house, and I could only imagine that was the most agonizing long 20 minutes of their life. By the time they got back to their house, the police were already there and they were questioning Trevor and Aaron about what happened to Jacob. The boys said that they were riding back from the video rental store when they were stopped by a man in a black mask who had a weapon. He told the boys to throw their bikes in a nearby ditch and then all lay down on their stomachs. The man then asked each boy how old they were. Trevor was 10 years old. The man decided that he did not want Trevor, so he told Trevor to run home. Run and don't look back or he would shoot him. Then he ordered Jacob and Aaron to both stand up and look at him. The boys were both 11 years old. They both had brown hair. They were about the same height. He wanted one boy, and it was a 50-50 chance, but he chose Jacob, and he sent Aaron running after Trevor. He told him, run home, don't look back, or I will shoot you. Aaron ran so fast that he caught up to Trevor. The boys ran another 100 yards, and then they decided to look back, but at that point, they did not see the man, and they did not see Jacob. Now, this story is crazy, and honestly, the police did not believe the boys' story at first. They thought that maybe something accidentally happened to Jacob, and the boys made up the story to cover it up because they were afraid of getting in trouble. So tragically, because the police did not believe the boys' story right away, they did not start looking for Jacob right away, which is the worst thing possible when you have a missing child. But once they did start looking for Jacob, this case was huge. Everybody knew Jacob Weatherling's name. They got thousands of tips, but the case still went cold and it went unsolved for 27 years. 27 years where the parents had no idea what happened to their 11-year-old son. But even as years went by and then decades went by, the investigators could still not let Jacob's disappearance go, and they actually uncovered that only a few months before Jacob disappeared, another boy was kidnapped. His name was Jared, and he was only 1 year older than Jacob, and the two stories were so similar that they had to have been committed by the same person. The man who kidnapped the other boy, Jared, took him from a similar area that Jacob disappeared. He took him into his car where he essayed him, and then afterwards he let Jared go. He told him to run home, don't look back or I will shoot you. It's the exact same story that Trevor and Aaron told the police the day that Jacob disappeared. There was DNA uncovered on Jared's shirt, but they could not match it to anyone for 26 years when they finally got a DNA match, and it belonged to a man named Danny Heinrich. Danny Heinrich was 26 years old back in 1989 when Jacob and Jared both disappeared. He was even questioned when Jacob Weatherling disappeared, but they didn't have any evidence against him. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations for the kidnap and essay of Jared had already passed, so Jared would not get any justice, but they were hoping that they could link Danny Heinrich to Jacob Weatherling. So they searched Danny's house to try and get something on him, and they found a mountain of something. They found so much child essay photos and videos, and they actually charged him with 25 counts of having this material in his possession. And then the police offered Danny Heinrich probably one of the most controversial plea deals in true crime history. I can't even lie or sugarcoat it, you guys are going to be extremely pissed off. They told Danny that if he made a full confession about what happened to Jacob and also showed them where he put Jacob's body, they would not charge him with killing 11-year-old Jacob Weatherling, and instead of charging him with having 25 counts of child essay photos and videos, they would only charge him with 1 count. So that's what piece of shit Danny Heinrich did, and after 27 years, Jacob Weatherling's body was finally found. I can't even to begin the emotions that Jacob Weatherling's family had. I don't even think there's a word for it. Like, bittersweet does not even cut it. On one hand, they finally have answers about what happened to their son, but now they know for 100% certain that Jacob will never be coming back. The night that Jacob disappeared, Danny said that he saw the boys riding to the video store, so he hid and waited for them to be coming back. When he kidnapped Jacob, he handcuffed him in his car where he did essay him, and Jacob was asking him, what did I do wrong? Danny said that he planned to let Jacob go like he did all the other boys, but he saw a police car drive by. This was completely unrelated because remember at first the police were not searching for Jacob because they thought that the boy's story was a lie, but it scared Danny, he panicked, and he shot Jacob. Due to the plea deal, Danny Heinrich essentially got away with murdering 11-year-old Jacob Weatherling. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a chance of early release if he has good behavior. This case is absolutely frustrating and heart-shattering. Let me know all your guys' thoughts in the comments, guys. And while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
Do you think that murderers should ever be released from prison? Because 3 people were involved in the murder of this young boy and 2 of them are already free. They lured him to a beach in Swansea where they beat him and horrifically murdered him, and they were complete strangers. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Ben Bellamy. Ben was born and raised in Sketty, Swansea. He was described as a lovely young man who wouldn't hurt a fly and he would do anything for anyone. He was kind, he was genuinely caring, and he was extremely talented. Music was his thing, and he was also smart. He had big plans to go to university after leaving 6th form. All round, he was a very well-liked young boy who seemed a joy to be around, and his mum would describe him as being her best friend. On the evening of the 17th of September 2005, 17-year-old Ben had been at a disco inside of the Cinderella's nightclub in Swansea. When the club closed at around about 2 a.m. and the night came to an end, all of Ben's friends jumped into a taxi, but he said that he was just going to walk the 6 miles home. While on this journey, he would bump into 15-year-old Joshua Thomas, 17-year-old Joel Taylor, and 18-year-old Andrew Rafferty, all of of which who had been out drinking that night. The young men all got chatting to one another and they began walking together. Shortly before 3:30 a.m, a CCTV camera would pick up Ben withdrawing £20 from his bank account. He would go on to spend that on buying himself and the boys awesome food for them to share, just showing his kindness and generosity. As they walked nearby the Swansea Seafront Memorial, one of them suggested that they all go on the beach, and so that's where they went. Once on the sand, out of nowhere and completely unprovoked, Joel would punch unsuspecting Ben, sending him flying. He fell onto Joshua and accidentally ripped his shirt, and seemingly this triggered a rage, and this was the start of a lethal beating. All three of the boys jumped on Ben, attacking him, punching him, kicking him, stamping on him when he was just trying to get away, not even trying to defend himself or get back at the boys. He would plead with Joshua, Joel and Andrew to just let him go and they could take anything that they wanted. He handed over his bank card and his PIN number, which Andrew would take to a nearby hole in the wall to try and withdraw some money out. But he wasn't able to do so. Either Ben had given him the wrong PIN or Andrew had misremembered it. Meanwhile, back on the beach while Andrew was at this hole in the wall, Joshua and Joel continued their savage attack on Ben, beating him until he fell unconscious. They would then strip him naked, leaving on only his socks before dragging him out to the sea and then leaving him there. Ben had been beaten so badly that he had been knocked unconscious. He was weak and he couldn't move and he would drown in the seawater. Ben Bellamy's body would be found later in the morning by a jogger on the beach who initially thought that this was a mannequin in the water, not the body of a savagely beaten, dead 17-year-old boy. Ben had been stamped on with so much force that the imprint of Joshua's shoe was left on his swollen face. Days later, Joshua Thomas, Joel Taylor and Andrew Rafferty would all be arrested and charged with murder. At trial, Joshua and Joel would be convicted of murder. Joshua received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years to serve. However, this for some reason would be reduced down to 17 years to serve later. And Joel got life with a minimum of 22 years to serve. The prosecution never actually tried Andrew for murder and instead they went for manslaughter. This is because he wasn't there at the time that Ben was dragged into the sea and then left behind. He was at the cash point trying to steal money from Ben. The manslaughter charge didn't stick and that would be commuted to robbery, where he was convicted and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. Andrew Rafferty was released after serving his sentence. However, a couple of years later he would be reincarcerated on drug charges, but he was re-released in 2020. Joshua Thomas was released in 2023 and Joel Taylor still remains behind bars.
A baby, a human child, was born into this cult and she remained isolated and secluded from the world for 30 years. The idea that people like you and me can be here living a normal life in a normal world and there could be a cult operating somewhere in the world, maybe not even far away from us, is beyond me. I'm completely going to botch his name, but Aravindan Balakrishnan, who we're going to refer to as Bala, was born in India, but he ended up living in London in the UK and became a cult leader. He ran the Workers' Institute cult from 1976 to 2013. So like I said, he was born in India, but he moved around until he eventually moved to the UK to attend college at 23 years old. And you know how sometimes in universities there are different kind of groups of people who have similar beliefs or similar interests. Well, Bala became one of those, but the thing that he was really passionate about was honestly just flat out disliking the UK government. He was described as being very politically active and passionate about his feelings towards things that he strongly disliked about the UK government. He was often out and about protesting. He would stand on the streets yelling things about his beliefs. And eventually he gathered up this group of people who had the same beliefs as him, and he called this group the Workers' Institute. And eventually this group of him and his followers all moved into this one building that honestly just kind of looks like a storefront, but I think technically it was a house. They were all living under the same roof. It was around 20 to 25 people, and Bala was their leader, and they would spend all of their time practicing their beliefs, preaching their beliefs to people, and conducting lectures within each other to make their beliefs stronger. And it comes to no one's surprise, but this group of people, they were not pleasant people to live by. They were obnoxious. They would often make others feel uncomfortable, and their behavior was just odd, and it was disrespectful. To the point that Bala was actually sent to prison a couple of times for disrupting his neighbors and being a danger to his neighbors. And after being
forced to face the consequences of his own actions, he thought, well, if I am going to do this, if I'm going to be the leader of this group and operate this group in the way that I wanted to operate, I clearly can't do it here. This isn't working. We're going to have to get up and move. So him, along with, by the way, they stayed in Braxton and still in London in the same area. They just moved houses. But him, along with his most loyal followers, which was a group of 8 women. One of those women was his literal wife, by the way. But him and these 8 women got up and moved into a different house with the plan of basically starting to live off the grid. And again, basically their whole thing was that they hated the UK government, and Bala being sent to prison only made him angrier. So he was like, all right, I'm going to take my wife and these other 7 women, move into this house, and we're going to basically spend every single hour of every single day in this house with no outside communication or distractions at all. And the reason why Bala was able to brainwash these followers so easily is because he would basically catch them at the most vulnerable parts of their lives. When these women were feeling lost and confused and not sure of who they were or what they wanted to do with their lives, which is a very common thing. It's a very normal thing to feel that way. But Bala would somehow meet these women and he would start whispering in their ears about these ideas and beliefs that he had. And he somehow was able to convince them to believe everything that he was saying, and in turn kind of made them scared of the UK government. And I hate to say it, but Bala was a very smart guy. He was very book smart. He was knowledgeable, and he used that to his advantage because he would disguise his manipulation as political education, and he would present himself as this guy that was a revolutionary leader, and he would slowly but surely begin to isolate his followers from their families and from the outside world, and he would convince them that the outside world was corrupt and evil. And then once they would start living together, it was only that much easier for him to be able to control them because they would be sleep deprived, they would be under constant surveillance, they would be constantly manipulated to the point where he would basically strip them from everything that they were until the only thing they had left was this weird loyalty towards him. Does that make sense? I don't know. So Bala would begin telling his followers that he was the chosen one, basically. He would tell them that he was the ruler of the world. He would say that he was a king, and then he would start telling them that he was God. That he was God. Yeah. He would tell them that he had superpowers. He would tell them that he was able to control minds, that he could destroy lives. Like, quite literally, he said that he could take people out of this world only using his mind and his mental powers. He said that he could control natural disasters like hurricanes and stuff. And he would say that he was immortal. Then he would tell them about Jackie. Jackie was made up, okay, but he claimed that Jackie was this supernatural force that was watching them at all times, and this Jackie being would punish them if they disobeyed him. He warned them about this supernatural force that could delete them from this world in 1 second at the snap of his fingers. So all of his claims would start off by him telling his followers that he had all this supernatural superpowers, and he would kind of make it sound like he could use these powers to protect them, like he could use his powers for good. But then once they started to believe him and he had successfully brainwashed them, then it would turn into, okay, all of the power that I told you that I hold, all of these things that I told you I'm capable of doing, I'm now going to use against you, and you better follow my rules, you better do as I say, and live the way that I want you to live, because if you don't, because I am so powerful, if you misbehave or if you get out of line, I will use my superpowers to end you, basically. And that's what happened, and he was able to gain absolute control of these women to such a dangerous degree. And of course, to no one's surprise, there were rules that had to be followed in this household. The rules were that, for starters, every single meal time, every single nap time, every single shower was scheduled on a very, very strict routine. Every single day, the group was to have lectures that Bala would lead, and they had to stand there the entire time and make direct eye contact with him and hear him talk nonsense. If they stopped making eye contact with him, they would be punished. Every single day, they had to collectively sing songs to praise Bala. Like, literally, they had to sing songs all together about how incredible Bala was. And on top of that, they also had chants that they needed to say. The chants went a little like, Bala is God, God is Bala, like, guys. And then at the end of the day, they would have discussions with Bala to discuss if they had been, quote, a good soldier that day. I also don't necessarily want to go into detail, but if any of the women ever stepped out of line, ever disobeyed Bala, the next day they would wake up covered in bruises. Sooner than later, in cult leader fashion, Bala decided that it was his right to be able to be intimate with any of the women whenever he wanted. It didn't matter if they wanted to or not, which, by the way, they didn't. But if he wanted to, he was going to, and he came up with a literal schedule with time slots of when he was going to SA each woman, and he would just rotate them. One of the women said that she was SA'd every single week for 6 years. This SA resulted in one of the women falling pregnant, and this poor baby was born into an environment that no human being should be in. Before this baby was even born, it was decided that her entire childhood, her entire life would be completely controlled by Bala, and he was going to raise this baby in the way that he wanted to, which was disgusting. He first of all wasn't ever going to tell this baby who her birth mother was. He wasn't going to show any love to this baby, nor were the women allowed to. The baby was never going to be shown any affection by any means. It was never going to be picked up, hugged, loved. Everything that a baby should have, this baby was not going to have. She was never going to leave the house. She was never going to go to the doctor. She was never going to go to school. She wasn't even allowed to step outside. She was not allowed to play or speak to anyone outside of their cult because Bala didn't want her to. And that's exactly what happened. And the baby grew up in that environment. That's how she was raised. And throughout the years that she grew up, she had no idea who her mother was. She was only cared for enough to be somewhat healthy. I wouldn't even say that. Enough to basically just keep her alive. But emotionally, she had nothing. The only person that she was allowed to interact with was Bala. And as the years passed and this baby grew up, Bala completely isolated her and brainwashed her. And that isn't hard to believe because she was literally born into this. It was the only thing that she knew from her first day on this earth. She didn't know any different. She did not know that the way that she was raised wasn't normal. She was terrified of the outside world because she didn't know that Bala was lying when he told her that the outside world was evil and used that to explain why she couldn't go outside. It was literally all that she knew. She was raised to believe that if she ever saw or spoke to anyone from the outside world, she would be taken and held captive. She was told not to walk by any windows, never to pick up the phone. She wasn't allowed to talk to anyone, actually, for that matter. She could only talk to Bala. She wasn't allowed to giggle. She wasn't allowed to dream. She was not allowed to run or play. She wasn't allowed to do anything. So Bala's cult-like behavior kind of started in the early 1970s, but I want to say that the actual cult really began in 1974. The first woman to escape the cult escaped in 1989 after years of living that way. We don't know for sure, but I can assume that things got so bad that she just started to question everything and then finally decided that she didn't want to live that way anymore. So one day she left and she never came back. A second woman escaped in 1992. She walked out and never came back. And 4 years later, in 1996, the baby's mother, by the name of Sean, started to question everything as well. Things were not making sense to her finally. A big thing that didn't make sense to her is that Bala was claiming to be immortal, yet day by day, year by year, he was getting older and older. So one day she approached Bala and she asked him, "If you claim to be immortal, why are you aging?" The next day, Sean coincidentally fell out of a window from the upstairs, an open window in the house. She fell out onto concrete. She was taken to hospital, where she later fell into a coma and she later passed away. At this time, her baby, that never got to know for sure if Sean was her mother or not, was 14 years old. 4 years later, another woman of the cult, so at this point there were 5 women left because 2 escaped and 1 tragically lost her life. And 4 years later, another woman suspiciously fell inside of that house and lost her life. And her death was never looked into. When Bala's daughter was 22 years old, she slowly but surely was starting to realize that the life that she was living in wasn't normal. And she managed to escape. She was successful in her escape. She ended up at a police station, but she had never been in the outside world. She was standing in this police station. She was terrified. She was confused. I cannot even imagine what she was thinking. And she told officers that she had just run away. And what did the officers do? They called Bala to come and pick her up, and she was sent right back to that house of horrors. 8 years would pass before Katie was able to finally escape and be freed of this absolute nightmare. It was in 2013. She was 30 years old. In 2013, Katie got the privilege to watch TV. Bala allowed her to watch TV, so one day she was watching TV with another one of the women that was left in the cult. And again, by this point, she had slowly started to realize that the things that Bala was saying about his powers, the dangers of the outside world, and the cult's purpose was all a lie. So they were watching TV and they saw a phone number appear on the screen. It was a phone number that it was like a hotline that you could call for help. And Katie, along with this other woman, made the incredibly brave decision that it was now or never. They needed to figure out a plan on how they were going to be able to dial this number, and they did. And once they got a hold of authorities on the phone, authorities were absolutely shocked. Police officers swarmed that house. They took Katie and the remaining women outside of the house and immediately placed them under protection. And they were finally safe. And Bala was finally immediately arrested. On December 4th of 2015, Bala was convicted on false imprisonment, 4 counts of 6 counts of and 2 counts of. He was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in prison. 23 years does not sound like a lot to me. But in 2022, Bala passed away in prison at the age of 81 years old. Since then, Katie has spoken out about her story, which is an unbelievable story. And it obviously took so long for her to recover from all the damage that she had been through. The only thing that she had been exposed to the last 30 years of her life, but she was able to, and that is literally incredible. I will end this video with a quote from Katie. She says, "Freedom is beautiful. Every day I wake up and feel grateful that I'm alive and that I'm free to be myself," end quote. That is all I have for today's video. I am so angry because what do you mean? This just is so baffling. It's hard for me to comprehend that this happens and that people like him exist and that people like him set out to do things like this. It's unbelievable. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thank you guys so much for watching to the end if you made it to the end. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This woman committed such a heinous crime that the people of Aberdeen were demanding her blood. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Helen Priestley. 8-year-old Helen lived on a first floor flat in this block of flats in Aberdeen with her parents Agnes and John. She was described as a quiet but confident young girl, however not everybody had glowing opinions on her. The neighbours who lived below them, the Donald family, did not get along with the Priestleys. The two mothers, Agnes Priestley and Janie Donald, had had a massive falling out years before and they never made up after it. They had been falling out for so long that neither of them could even remember why they had fallen out in the first place. It was said that Helen would torment the Donald family. She would kick their door in when she was passing it to go upstairs to her flat. She would shake the banister to cause a racket, and she supposedly relentlessly bullied Janie's daughter. So this, along with much more, made Janie really resent Helen, and she would be nasty to her. She would shout at her, scowl at her, and sometimes even chase her. On the 20th of April 1934, Agnes sent Helen along to the bakery to pick up a loaf of bread at around 1:30 p.m. As time was starting to pass, Agnes was noticing that Helen wasn't back home when she should be. She shouldn't have been taking this long, so she set out trying to find Helen, going to the bakery first. The baker confirmed that Helen had been and she had bought a loaf of bread, so Agnes made her way back up the flat, and when she found that Helen wasn't there, she started to worry. After some time had passed and Helen still wasn't home, overcome with fear, Agnes contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. This began one of the biggest searches in Aberdeen's history. Hundreds of volunteers aided in trying to help find Helen. They searched everywhere. They searched back gardens, abandoned building, all the alleyways, every single nook and cranny. They left no stone unturned, but Helen was nowhere to be found. The search went on all through the night despite the torrential rain. At around 2 a.m, after much persuasion, John, who was Helen's dad, made his way back to the flat with a friend named Alex. This is Alex, who was an upstairs neighbour to the Priestleys. John was exhausted. He had been at the forefront of the searches, desperately trying to find his daughter for hours upon end. Alex convinced him that in his exhausted state, he might not be as thorough in his search of Helen than he would be if he was energised. Alex assured John that they would go home, just have a couple of hours rest, get some energy back, and then they'd be both back up out searching. 5 a.m. eventually came round and Alex had left his flat, which was above the Priestleys, and tried to creep downstairs past the Priestleys' flat. He knew that John needed the extra rest, so being the good friend that he was, he kept his promise on getting a couple of hours rest and then going back out to rejoin the search. So as he's creeping down the stairs, he notices something on the ground floor that's out of place. There was a big bright blue bag that wasn't there when he and John had came in the flat at 2 a.m. He knelt down on the floor and unzipped the bag, discovering the body of 8-year-old Helen. It was found that Helen had been strangled to death, mutilated and raped. From inside the bag, investigators were able to extract foreign hairs that didn't belong to Helen. They noticed on the blue bag there was like a faded Canadian export stamp. It was found that these bags would be used to deliver flour, which led the investigators back to that bakery. When questioned, the baker admitted that yes, this bag had belonged to him and he had many of these bags. However, a woman had recently come in asking if she could borrow some, so he gave some to her. He didn't know this woman's name and he just gave police a very vague description of her. Something else that was interesting about the bag was that both the outside and the inside were bone dry. Now, as I mentioned, on the night of this search, it was pouring down with rain, so it would have been impossible for someone to walk through the streets with this bag without getting it wet, but also without being seen by the hundreds of people that are searching the streets for Helen. Police began to do door-to-door inquiries, beginning with everyone who lived in the flats. Everyone in the flats commented on Jeannie and her dislike of Helen and the fact that the Donald family were one of the only people who didn't participate in searching for Helen, and how it was a coincidence that this bag was found on the ground floor, the same floor that the Donald family lived on. Police questioned both Jeannie and her husband Alexander. I couldn't find exactly what prompted their arrest, but both of them were arrested. Alexander was quite quickly let go after many witnesses said that they had seen him in work in a barber shop the whole day that Helen had went missing, so that only left Jeannie. The public, who were given all of the details regarding Helen's murder, could not understand how a woman could inflict such a horrific death and sadistic injuries on an 8-year-old girl. They were absolutely outraged, and when they heard that Jeannie was getting arrested, they all kind of gathered around the flat ready to lynch her when she came out. Alexander and their daughter were actually forced to move out of Aberdeen because of the harassment and the death threats that they were constantly receiving. Jeannie's trial began on the 16th of July 1934 at Edinburgh Crown Court, where she pled not guilty. The prosecution had mountains of evidence against her though, including witnesses who had heard screaming coming from the direction of her flat. A professor from Glasgow University had compared the hairs that were found in the bag that Helen was found in to hairs from a brush that Jeannie had used in prison, and he determined that they were a perfect match. And much more, they actually had over 160 witnesses. Her defence was that it was shown that Helen had been raped, and apparently a woman couldn't do that. However, it was deemed that the injuries that Helen had sustained, which made it appear that she had been raped, were actually from household items. The jury deliberated for a very small 18 minutes before coming back with their verdict. 38-year-old Jeannie Donald was found guilty of the murder of 8-year-old Helen Priestley. This was one of the first times that forensic had aided in convicting someone, because forensics was still so new back then. Jeannie would go on to be sentenced to death, however an appeal saw this reduced to life imprisonment. Throughout her times behind bars, she was described as a model prisoner who was very warm, friendly, and considered a mother figure. In 1944, 10 years after Helen's murder, Jeannie's husband was diagnosed with cancer and was really poorly. Due to her good behaviour, she was granted compassionate leave so that she could leave the prison to care for her dying husband. After he passed, she was actually allowed to stay out, much to the disappointment of Helen's family and the general public. Jeannie died at 81 years old in 1976, never saying why she murdered Helen and never ever admitting it either.
The teenager that threw her baby away in the hospital trash can. I'm sure at this point most of you guys have heard of Alexi Trevizo, or at least have seen clips of her on social media, but there are some pretty recent updates to this case that I'm sure will disgust you just as much as they disgusted me. Before 2023, Alexi Trevizo was like any other teenage girl. She was a good girl. She never really got in any trouble. She had a high GPA. She already had gotten accepted into the New Mexico State University. She had a lot of friends. She had a long-term boyfriend. She had been dating for well over 2 years. And Alexi was a cheerleader. On January 27th, 2023, Alexi had been in pain for almost 24 hours straight. Alexi had gotten sick at cheer practice that day, and when she went home, she still had this severe back pain and stomach pain, so her mother took her to the emergency room. I don't know if it's the same thing for men, but when women go to the hospital or the doctor, it's pretty standard procedure to be given a UA test. Well, this test came back that Alexi was pregnant. Alexi and her mother both look shocked when they're told that Alexi is pregnant, but Alexi is telling the hospital staff that that is actually impossible because she had never even done the deed before. Having a false pregnancy test is extremely rare, but it is possible, so the hospital staff gave Alexi a blood test just to be sure. While waiting for the results of the blood test, Alexi is seen on the hospital surveillance footage literally sprinting to the bathroom. Alexi's mother follows her to the bathroom. She's knocking on the door like, "Hey honey, are you okay?" And Alexi just tells her, "I'm fine, mom, I'll be out soon." But the hospital staff is extremely concerned for Alexi. She's been in the bathroom for a very long time at this point. They hear a lot of weird noises coming from the bathroom. They hear the toilet being flushed over and over and over again. They hear the water running, and they hear Alexi grabbing a bunch of paper towels from the paper towel dispenser. Hospital staff is on the other side of the door, and they're asking Alexi if she's okay, if she needs help, and she's not answering them. So they tell Alexi that they're going to be going and getting a key, and they're going to be unlocking that bathroom door and coming in because they're concerned for her. Well, when Alexi hears that the hospital staff is going to be unlocking the door and coming in, she opens the door. 19-year-old Alexi just walks calmly back to her hospital bed like nothing happened. The hospital staff go into the bathroom and there is blood everywhere, and that's when they found the little body of a baby that had been stuffed at the bottom of the trash can in a trash bag. A little full-term baby boy just stuffed in a trash bag, and he was sadly already gone, so the police were called, and that's where the body cam footage that has been spread on social media comes into play.
We discovered a dead baby in the bathroom. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I came out of me and I didn't know what to do.
Lexi, I told you about this.
But
I just asked you. You need to tell me the truth.
Scared. It was not crying or nothing.
What did you do to it?
Okay, stop right here.
Lexi was only 19 years old. She was a senior in high school. She told them that the baby was born stillborn and it did not cry. She still had to be seen medically because she has just given birth before she was released from the hospital while they awaited to see what came of the baby's autopsy. And it was determined that his cause of death was asphyxiation from being put in that trash bag and not being able to breathe. And then on May 10th, a little over 4 months later, the police came to Alexi's house to arrest her. And Alexi's mother is pissed. She's arguing with the police officers. She does not want them going inside, and she definitely does not want them arresting her daughter. And they're telling her, "We are here to arrest your daughter for homicide and tampering with evidence charges." And her mom looks so upset and she's so concerned about the tampering with evidence charge.
Homicide. Open count of homicide. And tampering with evidence.
Tampering with evidence?
Yes.
At the hospital?
Yes. So, can we see her now?
She was released 6 days later, awaiting trial on a $100,000 bond, and after she was released, she hung out with friends and she went to prom. Her trial was meant to start this month, actually in only a couple days, but it was delayed, and hopefully it's going to start in October. Alexi's lawyer not only claims that the baby was born stillborn, but that Alexi actually had no idea that she was pregnant, and get this, her lawyer also claims that this is all the hospital's fault and that the hospital failed Alexi and her baby. And Alexi and her lawyer actually extremely recently sued the hospital for the wrongful death of her baby because Alexi should have never been able to go into the bathroom in the first place. That's what they're saying. This is very confusing to me personally because the hospital staff was trying to get into the bathroom to help her for over 20 minutes. But let me know what you guys think. Personally, I do not think that this lawsuit is going to go anywhere, and this is just like some kind of defense strategy that they came up with. This lawsuit is even more disgusting because the hospital staff that day is extremely traumatized because of this. These are people that went into the medical field and dedicated their lives to save lives, and they were never even given a chance to save Alexi's baby. Hospitals are also a safe haven place, if you did not know this, where mothers can surrender their babies, no questions asked. So Alexi's decisions that day, to me personally, seem like she just didn't want anyone to know that she was pregnant, she had a baby, and yeah, she just didn't want anyone finding out. How's that working out for you, Alexi? I actually have a really hard time that no one knew that Alexi was pregnant. She claims that she didn't know. Her boyfriend claims that she did not know. Her friends, her teachers, her mom all claim that they did not know that she was pregnant, but I've seen photos of her before she gave birth and she looks pregnant. Definitely let me know all your thoughts on this case, and also let me know what you think is going to happen in the trial. Apparently they have a lot of evidence that will prove that she did know she was pregnant, so let me know all your thoughts on that in the comments. And while you're there, please tell me what case you'd want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
A little girl was killed, and when police wouldn't act, the town dragged the killer out and beat them. She was just 8 years old. Her name was Camila Gomez, and she had told her parents that she was going to go next door to play in the pool with her friends, but she never came home. Her mom gets worried, so she goes to the neighbor's house, and a woman named Anna answers. And Anna, she says, Camila, I haven't seen her all day. But that was a lie, because footage from a local store showed Camila going into Anna's house, but never coming back out. Then a taxi pulls up in front of Anna's house. Anna and her boyfriend, they are seen carrying a huge basket and a black garbage bag. They hop in the taxi and just leave. Camila's mother is in full panic. She calls the police, but they don't act, and she even gets a ransom call of somebody demanding money for Camila's return, and the cops still don't react. And eventually they find the garbage bag, and inside was Camila's body. She had been suffocated. The entire town was furious because this was not the first time that police were too slow. So the town decides they'll handle it themselves. A mob forms, and they go straight to Anna's house. They drag her out and beat her so bad that she looked like an abused puppet. On video, you can hear someone scream, the bitch, break her ribs. Police show up and drag Anna into a squad car, but the crowd literally pulled her right back out and continued beating her. They're pulling her hair, they're ripping her shirt, they're kicking her in the head so many times until she died. There was no trial, no court, no due process, just a town that was tired of waiting for justice, and they took it themselves. Some people say that what the town did was just too cruel, but honestly, if Anna didn't care about Camila's life, then why should we?
This is the story of Shannon Crawley. Greensboro, North Carolina, Jameer Stroud, who was a police officer, started dating his co-worker, 911 dispatcher, 27-year-old Sharon Crawley. The two were just friends, but it turned intimate around the end of 2004, even though Jameer was in a full-blown relationship with 25-year-old Danita Smith, who was a graduate student in North Carolina University in Durham. Danita would gush over Jameer, often saying that she had the perfect boyfriend, so it's clear that she had no idea about the double life he was living. Around the end of 2005, Shannon gets pregnant, and Jameer is very vocal about not wanting to have a child with her, so she had to get an abortion. And I guess the pregnancy must have scared him, because after that, he called it quits. He said that he was going to focus on Danita and Danita only. Jameer proposed to Danita in November of 2006, and everything looked on the up and up until about a month later, the newly engaged couple was holding hand in hand walking into church, and Jameer sees Shannon giving him that death stare. On the morning of January 4th, 2007, Shannon drove to Danita's campus apartments, hid, and waited for her to leave out for work that morning. And when Danita left out, Shannon shot her point blank in the back of the head. A maintenance man who was riding around on his golf cart heard the shot. And right when he was about to call the police, he seen a woman running hysterically with her face covered, get into a burgundy Ford Explorer and left. The police got there around 8:30 a.m., but they didn't see anything, so they left. It wasn't until 10 a.m. when a resident from Danita's building was coming out, and that's when he discovered her body at the bottom of the steps. He initially thought that she had fell, but quickly seen that she was shot in the back of the head. Jameer drove from Greensboro to Durham, which is about 50 miles, when he heard that something happened at Danita's apartment. When he got to the scene, he stated his relationship with Danita, but he wasn't really questioned like that. The maintenance man told the police everything he could remember about the lady fleeing the scene. It wasn't until the next day where Jameer found out that they were looking for somebody who was driving a burgundy Ford Explorer. He immediately called the detectives and confessed about his infidelity. The police went to question Shannon at her job, and she said she don't even know who Danita is, and that she's never owned a gun a day in her life, and she was taking her child to a doctor's appointment at the time of the murders. But when the police was leaving, a co-worker of Shannon's pulled them to the side and said, "Hey, now I did sell her a gun, but she said it was for protection against Jameer and that he was harassing her." Shannon also told the detectives that she's never even been to Durham. And they like, how is that? When your cell phone pinged on their towers the day before and the day of the murders. It was also gunshot residue found on the steering wheel and the gear shift. January 9th, 5 days after the murder, even though they didn't have any DNA at the scene of the crime, nor did they have the murder weapon, but they had enough to still arrest Shannon. But she made bond rather quickly, and she moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, while out on bond, Shannon goes to the detectives with a whole nother story. She admitted to buying the gun, yes. She says she only bought it because Jameer was threatening her life. And on the day of the murder, Jameer forced her to drive to Durham. When he got out the car to confront Danita, she stayed in the car and said after he shot Danita, he got back in the car and hid in the back seat and forced her to drive back home. Shannon, you know somebody seen you, right? June 20th, 2008, while still out on bond, Shannon called the police on Jameer and said that he drove all the way to Charlotte, which was 120 miles, by the way, and sexually assaulted her with a knife, actually penetrated her with a knife. She did go to the doctor and get a rape kit, and it tested negative for semen. She did have a mark on her thigh and her neck, and her labia needed stitches, but it was never any evidence that Jameer was in Charlotte at that time. Shannon said, "If you don't believe me, he took the knife, so go check his trash can." And just so happened on June 23rd, Jameer was taking out his trash and happened to see the knife. He called the police himself, telling them about the knife. One of his neighbors even said that they seen somebody pull up and get out with dark clothing on and throw something in his trash can. Shannon, girl. Her trial started February of 2010, and during the trial, her defense team presented some recordings of what's supposed to be Jameer confessing to the murder of Danita. But the judge is like, hold on, man. These recordings don't sound about the right. It didn't even sound like Jameer. The recordings were labeled phony after phone records and towers were checked. On February 22nd, 2010, Shannon Crawley was sentenced to life without parole. She was convicted of first-degree murder. R.I.P. to Danita Smith. What I read about her, she just sounded like she just had a good head on her shoulder. She was supposed to walk the stage the following month. And to think that you got the perfect partner and he out here with a whole nother life and you don't have no clue. You leave it out your apartment and this lady just snuck you. Like, come on, man. Now, Yellow Tape, do y'all think they ever stop even messing around?
They tortured and traumatized a baby just to see if they could. His name was Little Albert, but we don't really know his real name. He was only 9 months old, calm, happy, and healthy. But these two psychologists, Watson and Rayner, wanted to prove that they could teach him fear. So they placed Albert on this small mattress and showed him a whole bunch of different animals, a dog, a monkey, and a white rat. At first, Albert loved these animals. He giggled and tried to play with them, showing zero fear whatsoever. But whenever Albert would touch any of the animals, Watson would smash a metal bar right behind his head, which made this horrifying, deafening noise that would scare anyone. Little Albert would jump and start screaming in terror, and they would do it over and over again until eventually Albert would literally shake in fear just from seeing these animals. And it gets so much worse. He started fearing everything that was white and fuzzy. Even Santa Claus's beard made him panic and crawl away. They completely broke his mind. And here's the part that pisses me off. Albert's mom supposedly didn't even know about these experiments. And when she found out, she grabbed her baby and disappeared. But some people say that she totally knew and let it happen for a paycheck. And for decades, nobody knew who Little Albert really was. Until years later, researchers tracked down a little boy named Douglas who was born in the exact same hospital the experiment happened in. They were convinced that he was Little Albert, but apparently Douglas was actually born with a neurological disorder. So if Douglas was actually Little Albert, they didn't just traumatize a healthy baby, they experimented on a sick child. So let's be for real, why are we still calling this an experiment and not for what it really is, child abuse?
This is the story of Lester Ross. May 2009, 29-year-old Rakia Holmes drove halfway from Georgia to meet her child's father, Lester Ross, who lived in Haines City, Florida. She was meeting him to drop off their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Ross. She needed him to watch her for the summer so she could focus on finishing school. And everything was okay until May 28th rolled around. That's when Sharon Ross, who is Lester's wife, got a call from Lester rushing her home. When Sharon made it back to the home, she found 3-year-old Sarah Ross deceased. When Sharon asked Lester what happened, he simply said it was an accident, but neither one of them called the police. Lester placed his 3-year-old daughter in a deep freezer, and that's where he left her. Now, when Rakia calls to check up on her daughter, Lester has to come up with a lie. He would tell her she's with a family member, she's on a play date, all the time she's with somebody else. Ronkeisha must have really trusted her baby daddy, because it wasn't until October 14th, the summer been over with, that's when she finally said, fuck it, I'm about to just drive down here to get my baby. On her way to Florida, she's calling Lester nonstop. She called her mother and her sister, telling them that, man, I can't even get in contact with this man. On October 18th, 4 days later, after he'd been ducking and dodging his baby mama, Lester told his wife, Sharon, to go to the store and get some rat poison, and told her to melt the pellets on the stove. And she did exactly what he said. He then told her to mix the rat poison in with a bottle of Coke that they had in the refrigerator. And she did it. Lester finally picked up the phone for Rakia on the 18th. He told her to meet him in the parking lot of a Walmart. Rakia relayed this message to her mother and her sister, thinking, this is finally about to be over. She's about to get her baby. But Lester called back and said, you know what? Just come over to my house and get her. When Rakia got to Lester's house, he had told her that their daughter was on her way back home. While she waited, he offered her a glass of Coca-Cola. Rakia Holmes was dead within the hour. When Sharon returned home a few hours later, she seen Rakia's lifeless body in their home office. Lester forced her to help him carry Rakia and the 3-year-old to the trunk. He told her to drive to an orange grove in Winter Haven, and that's where he buried the mother and the daughter. When the two returned home, Sharon said that Lester tied a rope around her neck and told her if she ever told, that he would kill her. That same night, Lester's cousin got pulled over for driving on suspended license, but he was driving Ronkia's car. He told the police that he was driving the car to Daytona for Lester. Lester's cousin was being trailed, so when he got pulled over, the unidentified lady pulled over with him, which police didn't know at the time that was Lester's wife, Sharon Ross. They later found out in a jail call that Lester's cousin had made. He told the person on the phone that Lester told him to drop the car off and that Sharon will take him back to Florida. On October 20th, somebody from Rakia's phone made several calls to her mother and her sister, trying to convince them that she is okay, that her car is an impound, and that she needs help getting her car out of the impound. Rakia's mother said that she asked her daughter, when are you coming back? And all she said was, I'll be back, and hung up on her. And her mama like, nah, something's not right. She reported her missing that same day. On October 28th, Lester was called in for questioning for the whereabouts of Rakia and his 3-year-old daughter. He told them that he hasn't seen neither one of them since October 18th, when he met up with Rakia to drop off his daughter in a Walmart parking lot. He even told the police he didn't know why his cousin was driving Rakia's car and that he didn't have nothing to do with that. Even though the police had Rakia's phone on the same tower as Lester's, it still wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. It wasn't until December 20th of 2010 when the police called Sharon Ross in for yet another interview. But this time was different. This time, she confessed. She told the police that she feared for her life and that Lester had a long history of being physically abusive. She told the police where they were buried, and Lester was arrested the next day, but it would take another 2 years for the girls to be properly identified because they were skeletons and neither one of them had dental records. Lester finally went to trial in 2015, and his wife and his cousin both testified against him. And there was one thing I forgot to mention. He told the police that somebody rode with him to Walmart to meet Rakia. It was a friend of his. And when the police questioned that friend said, I wasn't with him. And he also took a polygraph test and he passed. Lester Ross was found guilty on first-degree murder. He escaped the death penalty and got life without parole. Now, as for Sharon, I don't see anywhere where she had to do any time. And then I keep seeing 2 different stories. One story says she helped dispose of the body, and another story says she stayed in the car the entire time. Either way, do y'all think she should have got some time?